Good evening and welcome to the third of the Executive Coach Mentoring webinars for 2018. Today is Monday the 21st of May. My name is Suzanne Knowles. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Institute of Professional Coaches. Tonight we're going to focus on the first of the executive coaching units of study, and I'm going to take you through the most important points relevant to that unit of study. We have spoken beforehand with people on the call on the webinar, so we will skip the introductions and move straight into the unit. What these webinars are about are helping people to look at what course of study they're in, and of course we're in the executive coaching course, how they're happy with how they're progressing, and if not, what's holding them back, and then also how will they overcome it. So there's the opportunity for students to speak frankly with each other and with myself about how they can get moving on their course and keep moving and maintain that momentum, which is what you want when you're looking at a coach situation. So we mentioned in the last webinar about executive coaching, and we looked at the definition of what it is. I just want to reiterate that now, and then we'll move forward into tonight's topic of conversation. So executive coaching is a collaborative partnership or relationship between a senior executive and an external, usually external executive coach. External because mostly people internal to the organisation do not have the same credibility, they don't have the same experience, they don't have the same wisdom that they can bring to the senior executive. Although I have been speaking with people who have been coaching up from, say, a human resources or an L&D position into that executive space. But mostly, and I think this is where coaching started to infiltrate into the organisational sphere, is when external coaches come on board, and they can be a sounding board, but also an independent voice. They're not tied up politically with anything that's happening in the organisation, and so they're very much a trusted confidant to the senior executive. And the aim, of course, is to enhance the executive's personal and professional performance in his or her role and equip them for succession into the next promotional activity. That's usually where we're going with all of this. So there are two parts to the coaching from an executive point of view. One is the personal development of the individual to help them, become more inspiring leaders and motivate others in their organisation, to help them communicate effectively upwards and across all levels of the organisation, and to build trusting relationships with key stakeholders, both internal and external to the organisation. Secondly, from a professional development point of view, the executive focuses on things pertinent to the organisation, such as the strategic drivers that are going to take the organisation forward and achieve its objectives, as well as on their individual performance in their particular field of excellence, whether that's finance or marketing, whatever. So whichever contributes to the organisation's strategic direction and success. So for both of those reasons, personal development and professional development, we find that executive coaches are well and truly part of the organisational commitment to moving and helping their people at that executive level move forward into new positions, into new roles, into succession planning for the future of the organisation. So it is from those executive coaching sessions that feedback is generated before we get started on the coaching from both primary and secondary sources, such as by direct observation of how the executive operates, and that's what you want to talk with the manager of that executive, whether that's a CEO or whether it's a board member, for example, in relation to the CEO itself, himself or herself. So whoever operates in that C-suite environment usually has had a personality profile, 360-degree assessment of their personal and professional effectiveness conducted. And what you want to know is, can you see the results of that personality profile, so you can either debrief that with them if you are accredited in how that profile operates, or you can team up with somebody who is accredited. So, for example, a lot of organisations operate from a DISC personality profile or a human synergistics LSI profile, but others, for example, some of the mining companies we work with operate from, say, Hogan, and that is their primary source of 360-degree feedback and provide a development platform for their directors and leaders in the organisation. What you do want to know, and before you get started on the coaching, is what is the evidence? that says that there is a problem or that this person is really doing a great job and therefore should be considered for the succession planning process. So the first question is, why would people want to have an executive coach? What's special about an executive coach, and how can the executive coach help them in terms of what they're doing? So the first way that an executive coach can help is if, for example, there's a new executive taking on a new role, just been promoted to the position, and they may require some help in getting used to their role. Perhaps there's new skills or new knowledge that they need to acquire. It may help them to navigate who's who in the organisation, who's who in the senior level, if there are some conflicts or some rubs initially, to get over that and to get into the swing of working both in their role and working as a member of the executive team. Secondly, when the client shows potential but is not consistently performing. So you've got an executive who's very, very skilled at what they do and do a great job, but they don't do it consistently. So the coaching focuses on raising the level of performance to consistent peak performance. And believe you me, that is exactly what can happen when people entrust themselves into the hands of an executive coach as their accountable partner and work together to achieve the goals that they set out and agree to. Thirdly, there are sometimes barriers that get in the way of performance or improvement or relationships. And so some of these barriers will need to be addressed within the executive coaching session. For example, there may be some interpersonal issues with, say, colleagues and or key stakeholders, both internal or external to the organisation, which may need to be addressed, put on the table, looked at, and basically resolved before that executive can perform the best they can in their role. Secondly, conflict is always something that's in the back of your mind. It may get in the way of resolving some of the work issues and some of the performance issues that the executive is grappling with. So the executive coach will work with that executive and help to resolve that issue or and make sure that the relationship with the other person is preserved. So two things, they get on with their own job and do a great job, the tension is reduced, the conflict is reduced, and the other person can also get on with their role and do a great job too. Thirdly, they help to make better decisions based on a range of factors and in consideration of a very complex environment. So we work in a global environment with lots of digital disruptors, technology advances, etc. And the decisions that are made by executives these days are made fairly quickly, very quickly in fact, because speed to action, speed to implementation is something that is a competitive advantage for the organisation. And so the executive works with the coach, their coach, who is their coach. It's their, that person is their sounding board to throw ideas around, look at options, look at different perspectives, and to come to some decisions that they may have difficulty coming to by themselves because they perhaps haven't considered all the options and the consequences. Fourthly, the executive coach can help with conducting negotiations involving multiple levels of hierarchy and complexity. So it may not be just their direct manager, who may be the CEO, that they're having to report to. It may be a matrix organisation, for example, and so there may be multiple reporting relationships. Or it may be that some of their reach goes into the board and really that strategic direction of the organisation level. And so they need to then A, inform, B, support, C, help to make the decisions at that level, which is a very important strategic decision for the organisation to make. And in absentia of all the information that's available to them or to others, it may be quite a difficult negotiation to have with other people or other stakeholders who are involved. And fifthly, cutting through the confusion that fast-paced work environments present almost constantly. So there's a lot of possible ways of dealing with issues or options that may be presented to somebody at the executive level. How do they know which is the right way to go? There may be confusion because some members of the senior team may prefer one way and other members may prefer alternative ways. So how do they decide? And as I've just mentioned, it's a fast-paced environment where decisions need to be made pretty much on the spot, if not within a few hours. And the ramifications of those decisions can be quite enormous for the organisation, not just in terms of their performance and their capital, but financial capital, but also in terms of their human capital, and also in terms of their branding and their reputation in the environment, particularly if there's a media situation that has arisen, attracting lots of attention. So it's important to note too that that request for coaching may come from either the individual, him or herself, or it could come from their manager. And we'll talk about both of those scenarios as we go through tonight's webinar. This is the executive coaching model that I presented last week. You'll find that in your workbook. It has a three-step process. The first step is about getting the assessment and the feedback from that assessment as your evidence that a problem exists or that there is a goal to be attained. So there are some of the instruments that provide that 360-degree coverage. So that's the first step in the process, is getting the evidence, getting the baseline data in place. Next, oftentimes it's a coaching for performance scenario that the executive coach is faced with because there's an underperforming senior executive or manager or leader. Sometimes it's just that they haven't got the right tools or equipment or information or knowledge or understanding the political, large P, small p scene. So that's where the executive coach can help the client, in this case the executive, navigate through all that terrain and understand that more succinctly and professionally. And the third way that we coach in executive coaching is for development of the individual, for their goal of being part of the succession plan, for taking over a new division, for taking over an overseas assignment, for managing upwards as the opportunities arise. So that coaching for development is very much part of the growth and future orientation of the organisation. And that's where the executive will focus their efforts as well. Sometimes there's no need for a performance, coaching for performance avenue, because the person is performing very, very well, and you simply need to go into coaching for development with that. Or at other times, you might be presented with an individual who has some performance issues. However, after working with them for maybe 6 to 12 months, that person shows great promise, and then your coaching may reframe into a coaching for development with that person as they are retained in the organisation. It's a matter of just checking in with the manager and with the hierarchy to see what is their future aspirations for that person, and therefore that will help you to focus on the coaching needs of that person. In your workbook, there are a number of theoretical models that help you to understand the executive coaching process, and I'll go through a few of them now. The first model is a generalist model, a generic model of goal-directed self-regulation. And that is about identifying the issue, setting the goal, developing the action plan, taking actions, monitoring and evaluating the success of those actions, changing what's not working, and doing more of what is working. So that is a generic model of how you coach anyway. The second model is a much more robust model of coaching at that executive level. It's based on a measure of collaboration and a joint accountability, where the executive coach develops awareness, self-awareness and insight in the client, and then looks at the areas of responsibility. So what part of the coaching program or what part of that action and situation is the client responsible for? How do they come about co-creating their situation, whether it's having some conflict with a colleague, whether it's not understanding their role? What did they do or didn't do to put them in that situation? It's looking then at their level of commitment to resolving the situation and having things improve and make things better. And then what actions they may take. They may have taken some already. What worked, what didn't work? What might they do differently in the future to take action to resolve the situation? And of course, getting the results that they want. And in fact, knowing what success looks like so that they know when they have been successful in achieving their goal. So this is a much more robust model working in the executive space. Then we have a model called the iterative model of goals. So if you're looking at it from the left-hand side, you may have a client who's got a vision and some far-reaching distal goals. They can put that into place with SMART goals and action plans, and they can look at higher order purposes and intentions or lower order details for how to get that goal and to make sure it happens. For example, does the goal or the situation fit for them? Does it fit for their self-awareness and their understanding of the organisation and the organisational needs? So what is the alignment between their personal goals and their organisational aspirations? Then they go on to an ongoing management process where there are some goals that relate to their learning, their ongoing learning. There are goals relating to how they get on with their day, how they manage their time, how they manage their diary, and also how they perform in the role, of course, which is important to the organisation. The thing that's missing for me from this is how they manage their people. So a lot of the time when executive coaches work with that senior level executive, they're working with very smart, intelligent people who know what they're doing, who've been employed for their expertise, but sometimes they're not always people savvy and they don't actually get the best out of their people. They don't really know how to lead their people to get the outcomes from a team-based and an individual-based level. So that's oftentimes where the coach has a lot of work to be done. Then from those three areas there, learning goals, daily strivings and performance goals, they get outcome goals. So what is the outcome of all of that endeavour, all of that effort? And what's the result of it all? And is it consistent, although there's no feedback loop from this model, with what you started out looking at as your vision and your goals to start with? From there, the result goes into looking at those future aspirations, well-being, goal satisfaction, self-efficacy, believing that they can achieve those goals in the future for themselves and get some tangible benefits out of it. So this model is worth looking at in terms of it's an iterative process, that's for sure. However, from a model point of view, there to me is no feedback loop. You always want to be looking at feedback loop, probably implied by the fact that there's learning goals there, but it doesn't actually say where the feedback loops come in and how people might learn. This is a model that's useful in terms of looking at the wider global community, the global scorecard. So if you look at the top, you've got yourself, taking care of yourself, making sure you're on target, on purpose, self-awareness, etc. And your family and friends will be there somewhere sharing the love and friendship. So that's about balancing life, work-life balance, being healthy and fit, having pleasurable activities that enrich your life, and feeling accomplishment with what you're doing, the feeling of achievement. What's missing from that model for me is about purpose, making sure you're on purpose with your life's goals and desires. As you go forward, there's an organisation level where an individual will add value to the organisation's stakeholders. And there are some internal measures such as, are they adding value from a financial point of view, from a customer engagement point of view, and perhaps sales, if that's your area of expertise. An employee engagement area is always on the cards for leaders. Are you engaging your employees and making them feel like they're motivated and contributing and an integral part of the division that you're working in and that you're leading? The internal processes and resources, are they working? How are they working? The systems, the procedures? Are there opportunities there for innovation and improvement? And partnerships, are there any partnerships across divisions within the organisation or strategic partnerships external to the organisation that you want to take up and put into place at an organisation level? And of course, then you're looking at the bigger picture, the community and the world at large, and how do we make a difference and improve the world around us, ecologically, from a social perspective, from an environmental perspective, from an economic, how do we contribute to the economy and the well-being of our workers and our employees, and also of the community in which we operate, the allied services that provide support and supplies and maintenance perhaps to the work that you do. How are we contributing at a political level by making sure we have the best governance practices in place and that there's accountability at every step and transparency in what we do. And if there's any scientific rigor around quality or any artistic ventures or forms of creativity that we can incorporate, that's going to do better for the world. It's going to make the world a better place. So down the left-hand side, we look at our internal motivation as it relates to helping ourselves, helping our families and friends, contributing to the organisation and contributing to the world at large. So what are our desires? What's our sources of motivation and our values? And how do they affect all of the others in our life? How do we feel about what we do? Are we making a difference? What do we believe? Do we believe that we have a higher order purpose? and that we are there to do good in the world? What are our preferences from both a psychological point of view and a cultural point of view about contributing and making sure that others have their preferences met as well as us, and that there's a safe work environment that values preferences and differences? Is there a safe psychological contract to employment, not just this is your job and you've got a job for a period of a contract? And of course, what are our strengths and our weaknesses, and how do they contribute to the greater order of getting the work done and the job done in the best possible way and with the least possible angst, and also using our strengths and our expertise to move projects at the speed at which the organisation needs it to move, so that we are competitive in the organisation's environment. This is a model that looks at perhaps sometimes after the coaching experience, or what they call the coaching adventure. It's a funnel about, let's have a look then. You've been a part of the coaching program for a time. Let's review what happened in your coaching sessions. So maybe this is a model to pull out, let's say 3, 4, 6 months into the coaching process. What has been most memorable of your learnings from your coaching experience? What has been the impact not only on you, but also on others around you? Have they found that the changes have been beneficial to them? Or have they railed against the changes and wanted you to stay the same when you want to move on? What insights have you gained? And for me, this is crucial. Self-awareness and insight is what we coach for, because once people have an awareness of themselves and their actions and the impact on others, they may choose very readily to make the changes for themselves without having to be encouraged by the coach. And then what are they going to commit to do? What actions are they going to commit to take to move things in a positive direction, not only for themselves and but also for others? So that's where the change process comes about. Now, down the right-hand side, we have to ask ourselves some questions. So having had a review of what happened and looked at what's most memorable and the impact on self and others, so what's all that about? What have been the changes? What have we implemented? Then we look at the insights that have happened, and we ask, so what? So how has that made my life different or better or impacted on others? What has been the outcomes? And once we commit to a certain course of action, the question is, now what? I've made that commitment, I said I'm going to do it, now what's going to happen? And then, of course, there's the change, and then perhaps that's the impetus then to start all over again. Then what? After I've made the change, then what's next? What am I going to do differently? How's it going to improve my lot, my family's lot, my organisation's lot, and the world at large? How is this all going to happen? So this is a review process that, as an executive coach, you can teach your clients to do. And to self-review is one of the biggest teachings that you can give to your client, so that it's coming from an internal space of knowledge and insight rather than from, say, you prodding them to self-review. They'll do it automatically, and they'll do it so much more often, and they'll do it in relation to, say, an event that happened that didn't go so well, or an event that happened that went very, very well. So this is that review process to look at what works, what didn't work, and in what context and in relation to whom. They're all the sorts of questions you should be posing to your executive clients. This is a development pipeline, and it starts out, as I said, with insight. So self-awareness and insight. Once we have that, then the cog shifts, and it is motivational. When you gain insight into yourself, what you're doing, what you should be doing, you're motivated to do something differently. And once you do something differently, you may be motivated to develop extra capabilities. So in terms of executive coaching, oftentimes those capabilities will be centered around, for example, leadership development, to become more inspiring as a leader, more motivational to your direct reports. Or it could be developing the capabilities of people management, managing your people better, bringing them on board better, engaging them more freely, so that they're willing and able to come with you. They love to turn up to work, and they want to be with you because they admire you and you are a role model to them. And then, of course, it's in real world practice. So once they have the additional capabilities, for example, they could be coaching capabilities as well. So they're asking more powerful questions. They're reflecting on what their employees have told them about their life and their work. How can you engage, how can they engage their employees in real-world experience and practice? And of course, there's joint accountability for any changes that may be made, for example, to systems or processes or teamwork, how they manage their particular role. And all of that will come forward because as a leader, the executive will allow all those insights to come through from their direct reports, as well as gaining from the review that they've made of their own coaching situation. So, how is coaching different from just coaching anybody who comes into your office or workspace? It's different, as we mentioned last webinar, because you have two clients. You have the individual as a client, where you're working with that individual to look at their goals and their actions, anything that might get in the way of them actually committing to and taking those actions. We're looking at those around them in the work group and perhaps any interpersonal difficulties they might have, any conflictual areas in their life, how they might change their behaviour in response to the insights that they gain from their coaching. But also from an organisational perspective, the organisation is probably paying for your coaching, and so they're looking for a return on investment. So how do you navigate the internal expectations of the manager and the organisation is what we're going to talk about very, very shortly. And here we go. So negotiating the coaching program. Now, as Stephen Covey would say, how you begin is how you end. So we're going to begin on a note which says we're going to negotiate upfront every little detail we possibly can to get on the same page so that the expectations around coaching are out there on the table. And particularly, first of all, when you meet with the manager. So it's just you and the manager, where you're looking at now, what is the problem? What is the goal for this person? What's the evidence that a problem exists? Is it that the person is underperforming? Have they not reached their sales targets? Have they had conflict in the workplace again and again and again? And if the manager hasn't gathered that evidence, then it behoves the manager for him to do that, or her. So what you want to do is have concrete evidence that there is a problem and it's happened A, on a number of occasions, or B, in a number of circumstances, or C, with a number of people in the environment. So if the manager has not collected that evidence, I would suggest that you need to reschedule your meeting until such time as that evidence is available, because then there's no context when you're talking with the actual employee. Out of that evidence also falls the coaching needs of that person and the purpose for coaching. So if for example, the employee is having trouble with a colleague and they're rubbing heads, the coaching need would be for that employee to develop more collegial relationships at work. And the purpose of coaching would be along the lines of just that, where you're looking at the success factors, the goals being to have a working relationship with that person and setting the standards for that working relationship based around cooperation, collaboration, sharing of information, etc. So it's not good enough just to have a goal. Even though it's what you need to do is you need to state the goal. But if there's certain standards or expectations around that goal, then that needs to be stated as well as part of the negotiations up front. And then, of course, the logistics for the coaching program need to be decided and agreed with the manager. So, for example, how often the coaching will happen, where it will happen, whether it's in the organisation or in a coffee shop, who is present, who will receive information from it, how confidential and private the coaching sessions are, what the manager can expect as feedback from you or not. And invariably it's not. It's actually feedback from the employee themselves, who will be briefed by them, will brief them as a result of your working with the employee. So that first part of that negotiation is the most important part. And as I say, if everything is not crystal clear and above board, and particularly if the evidence that a problem exists is not there, then I would suggest you arrange a second meeting in a week or two's time, by which time the manager will have gathered that information. Once that information has been gathered, then it's a meeting of the three of you, with the manager, the client, and yourself. And the first question is the client aware that there's a problem or an opportunity? Because sometimes the client's not aware. They don't know that they've got a performance issue. Nobody, the manager, has not told them about a performance issue. And they're in the dark. They've just been keeping on going and thinking perhaps that they're doing a good job, but getting no feedback on it. So has the manager provided feedback? If so, how often? In what way? Has it been face-to-face? Has it been in writing? Has it been just an email that says something or other? It's not good enough if it's just an email. It needs to have been sit down in person. So if the client has not had the opportunity to get feedback about their situation, this is the time where it needs to come out. So because the manager has now gathered the evidence, this is when the evidence should be tabled by the manager and explained to the client what they're doing there and what the purpose of coaching is, the reasons why a coach has been engaged. And usually at this stage, it's actually to improve their performance. If there is an opportunity there and there's no problem, if it's a goal opportunity, the reason could be engaged for a developmental process, because there's an opportunity for you to step up in the future and to do some work sideways, for example, or to take up a role when someone vacates, going on holiday for 6 weeks or something like that. So whatever the reason, that's the time to state the reason and then to state what the coaching needs and outcomes are and the purpose for coaching. As before, what are the success factors? How will we know that the problem has been turned into a goal? So instead of having a contentious relationship with a colleague, the goal is to have a collaborative, cooperative relationship with the colleague. Oftentimes that goal is the opposite of what the problem is presenting itself to be. And the same for the logistics. They need to be negotiated up so that everything is on the table. And when that person is absent from work for an hour, once a fortnight, for example, that there's no contest, that is quite legitimate and it's been sanctioned and authorised by the manager. You might at times have to negotiate, or the manager might be having to negotiate, why this employee, why is this person being singled out for special treatment by coaching? So that's a question for you to negotiate with the manager in case other employees want to be coached. And that's of course what you would encourage, that not just one in the team is coached, but that everyone in the team is coached. So the first part of the second part rather of our executive coaching model is coaching for performance. We're going to have a look at that now. So what's the process when you go in to have that coaching for performance meeting? Now this is just you and the client. So once again, you have to reiterate with the client your understanding and gain agreement, and their understanding and gain agreement on what is the problem. So in this case, it will be a problem in terms of their performance. And what you need to identify is, do they have a desire to move forward? Do they have a desire to improve what they're currently doing? Because if they don't have a will, then they won't engage. So there's a degree of commitment that they need so that they can continue to do their job and to do it even better in the future. If there is resistance at this point, then it's for you to say to the client, well, we can not meet, but your manager wants us to meet. And if you're not going to engage in a coaching conversation with me, then perhaps you'd better go back and tell your manager that, and you can have a frank discussion with him or her about that. So let's presume that the client is well aware that their performance is suffering and that they would like to improve it. Then the next step is, of course, to set some goals, looking at their role, perhaps looking at their baseline data that you've collected around their sales performance, if that's a big one, or some of the KPIs from their role if they've been slipping, and you'll have that information from their manager. Or if it's around, say, their leadership skills or their communication skills or their relationship skills, which are typically called the soft skills. So you will set goals around the hard skills, which is their KPIs, and the soft skills, realising that sometimes they may not have some skills. They may need to be taught how to be more assertive. They may need to be taught how to say no to somebody if they're constantly taking on more and more and more and not saying no to somebody, how to say no in a nice way. They may have to be taught how to manage their time or how to prioritise and do an urgent important matrix. But if there's a will there and the desire to improve, then all of that will fall into place. The will to learn is the most important thing. Out of that goal setting will come action planning, commitment to taking those actions, and of course there's an accountability factor. Now, there's a joint accountability factor, in fact, so the client is responsible for taking those actions. And your part in it is to hold them accountable. So when they come to the next coaching session, or even before, have they completed on the actions that they said they would complete on? And if not, why not? And of course, you don't let them off the hook if they say, oh, I've been too lazy or I haven't had time. The only time that you will let them off the hook is if there's a factual reason that, for example, they were sent into state to do a 2-day conference or something like that. If there's some facts getting in the way of them completing their actions, then you can hold over those actions till the next coaching session if they're still there. The third, of course, but has the coaching session been successful? So we always finish off the session with, have we covered everything we need to cover? Have we achieved a successful outcome for this session? And if not, why not? What do we need to go back and recover at this point in time, if there's time? Or what do we need to hold over to the next session? And of course, the other thing to ask at the end of each coaching session is, how do you feel? How do you feel? And if the session has been successful, what you'll find is they will be feeling lighter, the client will be feeling brighter, the client will be feeling energized, and you will be feeling energized as well. Hopefully the client will have gained some self-awareness and insight. There would have been some aha moments coming into the coaching when the client would have perhaps sat back in their chair and said, I know exactly what to do. And you don't have to do anything, you just have to be there and reflect back to them what they're saying, actively listen, be non-judgmental, hold your biases, be totally present with them in that moment, and accept that they have the resources inside them to resolve their own situation, which if you are coaching well, they will come to that conclusion. So the third part of our executive coaching model is coaching for development. And what we have then is a process which is pretty similar to the coaching for performance, but it's around a goal orientation. So let's say you have a person who is up for a promotion. Let's have a look at the goals, or they want to promote through the organisation. So their goal is to, let's say, promote to the next level within the next 12 months. And their manager has told you that they are a good performer. The three of you had sat down and looked at this goal for promotion, where they might go to next. Then you may have looked at some opportunities in the next 12 months for them to manage up, for example, or to manage sideways, or to go on an overseas 6 weeks tour, for example, of another facility. And there's agreement about that. So what you do is you focus on that future vision for them. So in 12 months' time, where will you be? What will you be doing? And when you use the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic modalities to have a look at that. So you want to get them fully immersed into it, into those modalities. So what's your vision? If in 12 months' time, when in 12 months' time, you are the manager of XYZ division, what's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? What do you see around you? Who are you working with? Where is your division located? What noises do you hear? What environmental sounds are there? Where are you located? What's the temperature of the room? Is it air conditioned? Is it out in the open air? Is it field based? Where are you likely to be? So you do the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and you try to totally get them totally immersed in where their future vision is of that management position, or whatever their goal is for the next 12 months. And then looking back over that 12 months, what have they done to achieve that promotion? And that becomes your goals. So, for example, they might have managed upwards for a 6-month sabbatical when someone was away. They might have taken a two-day course in XYZ, which is pertinent to their new role. They might have mentored somebody or been mentored by somebody else who was in that role and has now moved further upward. And they might have enrolled in a short course for themselves on ABC, which is part of their desired goal, to learn more about that goal. So all of those are things that they will action plan and make a commitment to doing in the next 12 months. And then, of course, your role is to hold them accountable so that you know that all of these things have been done. And once again, at the end of the coaching session, it's, has the coaching session been successful? What have we covered? What haven't we covered? What do we need to go back on? What do we need to reiterate? And as a coach, you can either summarize the session for your client, or you can ask them to summarize the session. And particularly when it's coaching for development, I usually ask the client to summarize their session. What are the goals that you want to achieve? Over what period of time? What actions have you committed to? Just give me a rundown on all of that. And when the client is crystal clear in their mind about all that, it will happen. Some of the things I'd ask you to consider is 3 scenarios here. What would you do in this first scenario? How would you approach this scenario? When the client shows potential but is not consistently performing, we talked about that. Coaching focuses on raising the level of performance to consistent peak performance. So is that a coaching for performance or a coaching for development scenario? What would you do? And here's a clue. It's a coaching for performance, where you would go through all of those steps that we talked about to help them get the key to unlock their peak performance. So when are the times when they're really at peak performance? What are they doing? Where are they working? Who are they working with? Is there a buzz in the air? Is it consistent? So what's not in place now? What do they need to put that buzz back in the air, or that spring in their step? Is there something happening at home, for example, that's causing them to be a bit concerned? So you delve into what's happening at work, and trepidatiously, can I just ask you a little bit about what's happening at home and see what their response is? You don't want to go and being interrogative in terms of their family life, but you want to know if there's something there that's hindering their performance. And as a result of that, that could lead into a whole different kind of conversation, a real coaching conversation. The second scenario is about, what if you had a client taking on a new role, which may require the acquisition of new skills and knowledge? What kind of a coaching process is that? Is it coaching for performance, or is it coaching for development? And of course, when you've got someone who's motivated to achieve and wanting to go places, it's coaching for development. And you go through all of those aspects there about, how do you lead by example? How do you motivate? How do you inspire? Have you got a mentor as well as a coach? 2 different things. A mentor will give you the pathway forward through the organisation, and it's particularly important when you've got someone who wants to promote and or has just got into a new role and doesn't understand the role as well as they might. And how do you then develop teamwork with your colleagues, and the interpersonal and personality preferences? These are the sort of areas you navigate through and with a new role and a new person in that role. The third scenario is, what would you do to resolve interpersonal issues with colleagues and or with key stakeholders? Is this a coaching for performance issue, or is it a coaching for development issue? This one can be a little bit tricky, and so the answer is, well, it could be either. Because if the interpersonal issues are getting in the way of performance, it could become a coaching for performance session. But if the interpersonal issues are pulling the person back from their development, then it could become a coaching for development. Or it could simply be a coaching conversation about how to resolve interpersonal issues in the workplace, how to build better rapport, better relationships, communicate better with people, understand where they're coming from, get on the same page with them, relate better to them, be more assertive maybe in their communication, understand where they're coming from in terms of their values and beliefs, and have a conversation about how that relates and aligns with yours or doesn't. So perhaps it's not one or the other, but from a problem identification perspective, of course, there's an interpersonal issue, and we need to agree on that and desire to move forward into, let's resolve this interpersonal issue. Let's have a good relationship with your colleague. And how can we do that? But state the goal as having a good relationship with your colleague. Then you can goal set an action plan for how can you develop a better relationship with your colleague. How can you build more rapport? How can you build the communication bridge so that you're both on the same page? And of course, help that the client become more accountable in what they do. So those are the scenarios that we would work on, and the ways that you would work on them in those situations. That's all for tonight. Next month, I should say, the executive coaching will focus on the second of the 2 executive coaching units, and that will be conducted on the 18th of June. So I look forward to seeing you all then, and until then, I wish you have a good look at the workbook and to get on with your assessments, and so that we can do some practice work with coaching at that executive level. So thank you for attending tonight, and I'll see you next month.